Episode 1: The Room That Locked Itself. I never believed in haunted motels until that night. It was raining hard when I drove into the outskirts of that forgotten town. Neon lights flickered, struggling to illuminate the faded sign, Maplewood Motel. My tires crunched over the gravel and the wind carried a smell of wet earth and decay. The lobby was empty, except for a receptionist hunched over an old ledger, her eyes barely lifting as I asked for a room. She handed me a key without a word. Room 7. The number scratched on the brass tag seemed ordinary, but as soon as I stepped inside, something felt off. The air was colder than outside, almost wet, and the smell of mildew mixed with something else, something faintly metallic. I set my bag down and turned to lock the door behind me. I remember the lock sliding into place with a soft click, but then it clicked again, by itself. I frowned. I tried the knob. Locked. I pulled, twisted, jiggled. Locked. My stomach churned. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. Only the steady drip of water from the leaky ceiling answered. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, moving slightly as if breathing. I could hear faint scraping, like fingernails tracing the floorboards. I told myself it was just the old motel settling, that the storm outside had me on edge. But then came the voice. It whispered my name, soft, almost intimate. "Michael." I spun around. Nothing, just the bed, the cracked lamp, the peeling wallpaper. My phone had no signal. The doorknob jiggled, locked. I rushed to the window. Rain streaked down the glass, the neon sign outside wobbling in its reflection. And then I saw it. A shadow pressed against the glass, tall, thin, stretching impossibly. It didn't move like a human, yet it mirrored me. When I stepped back, it stepped closer. I screamed. The shadow vanished, leaving the room colder than ever. I tried the door again. Locked. I pounded, yelled, screamed. Nothing. Minutes, or was it hours, passed until exhaustion forced me onto the bed. That night I learned something I'll never forget. Some rooms don't just trap your body. They trap your fear, your sanity, your very sense of reality. And room 7, it had claimed me first. In the morning, the receptionist looked up. "Check out?" she asked. I nodded, trembling. The door unlocked easily this time, as if nothing had ever happened. But the shadow didn't leave. Not really. Because now, even in daylight, every time I close my eyes, I feel it behind me, waiting for me to return to that room, waiting for nightfall. Episode 2. The Whisper from the Vent. I thought the worst was over after that night in room 7. But motels, they don't just hold people, they hold echoes. It was 2 weeks later when I found myself on another late-night drive, exhaustion pulling at my eyelids. I swore I'd never stay in a roadside motel again. Yet the storm made the highway dangerous, and the only glow for miles was the battered neon sign, vacancy. This time, it was a different place, the Silver Pines Inn. The lobby smelled of bleach and stale cigarettes. The man at the desk didn't ask for ID, just slid me a brass key with a chipped number 12. The room looked ordinary enough. A queen-sized bed with a floral blanket, yellowed curtains, and a TV from another decade. But the moment I shut the door, I felt it again. That pressure in the air, the sense that someone else was breathing with me. I lay down, trying to ignore the pounding rain against the window. That's when I heard it. At first, it was faint. A whispering sound, like wind caught in the ventilation system. I sat up, straining to hear. The vent above the dresser rattled softly, carrying with it a hushed voice. And then it spoke. "Don't close your eyes." My chest tightened. I told myself it was the pipes, the storm, my tired brain inventing things. But the whisper grew clearer, sharper, threading itself into my ears. It knew things it shouldn't. My childhood home address, the name of my ex-girlfriend, the secret I'd buried years ago, one I had never told anyone. I covered my ears, trembling, but the voice seeped through my skin, vibrating inside my bones. "You left her. You let her drown." "No," I shouted. My voice cracked. I hadn't thought of that day in years. The accident at the lake. The way I froze instead of diving in. Nobody knew. Nobody but me. The vent groaned, the metal bending outward as if something was pressing against it from the other side. Cold air spilled out, reeking of rot and damp earth. I grabbed my bag, fumbling for the door, but it wouldn't open. Not again. The knob refused to turn. The whisper grew louder, angrier. filling the room. Confess, confess, confess. The vent cover snapped. Something pale and skeletal began to slide out, its jaw hanging loose, whispering with every twitch of its lips. Its hollow eyes locked on me. I don't remember how I got out. Maybe I blacked out. Maybe the storm killed the power and something let me go. But I woke in my car, parked miles away from the Silver Pines Inn, the key to room 12 still clenched in my fist. I never confessed, and I never will. But sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I hear the air vents in my own house whispering. And I know one thing for sure. The motel isn't finished with me. Episode 3, Check-in at Midnight. They say nothing good happens after midnight. I never believed that until I checked into the wrong motel at exactly 12:20 a.m. The storm had followed me for hours, chasing my headlights across empty back roads. I was bone-tired, half blind from the rain, when I spotted it. A glowing sign that cut through the darkness like a beacon. The Red Lantern Motel. The parking lot was deserted. No cars, no sound but the rain. Yet the lobby lights burned bright. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Behind the counter sat a man in a perfectly pressed suit. His hair was slicked back, his face pale, waxy, like a mannequin left too long in the sun. He didn't look up as I entered. Instead, he murmured, "Room for one? Midnight check-in." I froze. I hadn't told him I was alone, hadn't said a word. His hand slid a key across the counter. The brass tag glimmered. Room 3. When our fingers brushed, his skin was cold. Not just cool, cold, like ice straight from the grave. I should have left. God, I should have turned around. But exhaustion and curiosity chained me in place. I took the key and climbed the stairs. Room 3 was immaculate. Too immaculate. The bed was perfectly made, the curtains drawn tight, the air heavy with the scent of lilacs. I dropped my bag and sat down, trying to shake the unease. That's when I noticed the clock. A small brass clock on the nightstand ticking louder than it should. 12:01, 12:02. Each tick felt like a hammer against my chest. And then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the door. I swallowed hard. "Hello?" No answer, just silence. Then another knock, this time from the inside closet. My skin went cold. The door creaked open on its own, and there, through the sliver of darkness, I saw a figure. A man. No, not a man. The same receptionist from downstairs, his pale face glowing faintly. Eyes like dead glass marbles. But he was already inside the room. The clock ticked louder, drowning out my heartbeat. 12:03, 12:04. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just stood there, watching me, as though waiting for something. I bolted, grabbed my bag and ran. The hallway stretched longer than before, the exit sign receding into darkness. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow and steady, echoing with every tick of the clock. Somehow, I made it outside. Rain slapped my face as I dove into my car, started the engine and sped off. When I dared to look in the rearview mirror, the motel was gone, just an empty road swallowed by rain. But the brass key still lay in the passenger seat. And every night since, at exactly midnight, I hear 3 knocks on my bedroom door. Episode 4, The Room That Knew My Name. The strangest part wasn't the smell of damp carpet or the flickering light above the door. It was the mirror. I checked into the Ashwood Motel late one night, desperate for a bed and 4 walls to keep out the cold. The receptionist barely looked up when I gave her my name, just pushed forward a key with a dull silver tag. Room 9. The hallway leading there felt too long, each step echoing as though I were walking inside a cave. When I finally unlocked the door, the first thing I noticed was how spotless everything was. The bed was tucked tight, the curtains drawn neatly, the bathroom smelling faintly of bleach. But it was the mirror above the desk that caught me. It was already fogged with condensation, though the room was freezing, and written across it, in shaky letters, was a message. "Welcome, Daniel." My stomach dropped. I hadn't spoken my name aloud since arriving. The receptionist never asked. Nobody knew I was here. I wiped the glass clean with a towel, my hands trembling. For a moment, the words vanished. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it was a leftover from a previous guest. Maybe coincidence, maybe another Daniel. I lay on the bed, exhaustion tugging at me. But when I closed my eyes, the air grew heavy, damp. My skin prickled. Slowly, I opened my eyes and froze. The mirror was fogged again. Fresh words appeared, forming in real time as though an invisible hand traced them across the glass. "Don't sleep. Daniel. He's watching." My heart slammed against my ribs. I stumbled off the bed, staring at the mirror. My reflection looked back at me, only it wasn't right. The reflection's mouth was moving, whispering. My lips were still. I pressed my ear close, shaking, and I heard it. My own voice, whispering secrets I had never told anyone. Things I wasn't proud of. Things I thought I had buried. Suddenly, the reflection smiled. Wide. Too wide. And behind it, in the glass, a figure loomed. Tall, faceless, its head bent unnaturally low, as though it were listening. I staggered back, tripping over the chair. The lights flickered, buzzing violently. The mirror rattled in its frame, the words smearing, reforming into something worse. "You can't leave, Daniel." I bolted. I didn't care about my bag, my phone, my wallet. I wrenched open the door and sprinted down that endless hallway, the sound of my name hissing behind me from every direction. By the time I burst into the night, gasping, the motel was silent, dark, abandoned, the lobby empty, the sign dead. But the mirror wasn't finished. Because now, every mirror I look into fogs slightly, no matter where I am. And sooner or later, I know I'll see those words again. Welcome back, Daniel. Episode 5, The Housekeeping Shadow. I never trusted motel rooms that felt too clean. At the Crescent Palms Motel, everything looked polished. Crisp sheets, gleaming tiles, even the scent of lemon cleaner hanging in the air. But as I stepped inside room 14, dragging my suitcase behind me, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, as though someone had just stepped out of sight. The curtains shifted, though the window was closed. A soft creak echoed from the bathroom. I told myself it was the cleaning staff, maybe still finishing up. But when I checked the bathroom, it was empty. No mop, no towels, just silence. That night, after a long drive, I collapsed onto the bed. The TV murmured static, my eyelids growing heavy. And then I saw it. A shadow. It stretched across the wall near the dresser. Long, tall, unmistakably human. The problem was, no one stood there. My heart lurched. I sat up, rubbed my eyes. The shadow twitched, shifted, bent down as if to watch me closer. I whispered, "Hello?" The shadow froze. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lifted an arm. My arm. It was copying me. I raised my hand. The shadow did too. But a second later, it tilted its head the opposite way, a beat out of sync, like it was learning, testing. I turned off the lamp. The room went dark, yet the shadow remained, etched sharper than ever against the wall. It didn't need light. It had its own. I lay there, trembling, trying to convince myself to sleep. But around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of sheets rustling. My body felt pinned, heavy. My lungs struggled for air. And on the ceiling above me, black and shifting, the shadow loomed. It leaned down, stretching impossibly long arms toward my throat. I thrashed, gasping, and suddenly, the weight lifted. The shadow slipped back, melting into the corner of the room. For the rest of the night, I sat awake in the chair, watching it watch me. At dawn, I stumbled to the front desk, demanding to leave. The receptionist gave me a strange look and said, "Funny. Room 14 hasn't been cleaned in weeks. We don't even send housekeeping down there anymore. Not since the accident." "What accident?" I asked. Her smile faltered. "The maid. She collapsed in that room. Heart attack." They say her shadow still lingers. I left without another word. But sometimes, when the lights go out in my own bedroom, I catch it again. A flicker in the corner. A darkness that doesn't belong. Waiting, mimicking, and learning. Episode 6. The Neighbor Who Wasn't There. Walls in motels are too thin. You can hear everything. Arguments, televisions, muffled laughter. But at the Redwood Inn, what I heard through the wall wasn't just noise. It was something that should never have been there. Room 18. I'd been driving 12 hours straight, so tired my bones ached. I threw myself onto the bed, half asleep, when it started. A faint giggle. A woman's laugh, soft and playful, drifting through the wall from room 19. I smiled at first. It sounded almost comforting. Then came a man's voice, low, hushed, impossible to make out. They talked for hours. A couple, I thought. Lovers. But at 2 a.m., the tone shifted. The laughter cracked into sobbing. Sharp, desperate sobs. Furniture scraped violently against the wall. making my lamp shake. Then a scream tore through the plaster, high, ragged, cut short. I shot up, heart pounding. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. I pressed my ear against the wall. Nothing, just dead air. I couldn't sit still. I stormed out into the hallway, barefoot, fists clenched. I pounded on the door of room 19. Hey! Is everything okay in there? No answer, not a sound. I tried the handle, locked. My pulse raced. I went to the front desk, breathless, demanding the clerk check on the guests. The old man behind the counter blinked slowly, then frowned. Room 19? Yes, I snapped. The people next door to me, something's wrong. He hesitated, then pulled out a ledger. His finger dragged down the list. Finally, he shook his head. Room 19 hasn't been rented in years. Water damage. We boarded it up. My stomach turned to ice. That's impossible, I whispered. I heard them. All night. I heard... He cut me off. No one is staying there. His voice was flat, final. I went back upstairs, hands trembling, and stopped dead at the top of the stairs. The door to room 19 was wide open. Inside was darkness, the kind of darkness that swallows light whole. The sobbing started again, echoing faintly, pulling me toward the threshold. I forced myself to turn away, to stumble back into my room, slam the door shut, and wait for dawn. When I finally left, the sunlight spilling over the parking lot, I dared to glance at room 19. The door was sealed shut with rotting wood, dust coating the frame, and yet faintly, through the boards, I still heard it. A giggle. Episode 7. The room that checked itself in. There's something profoundly wrong when a motel ledger shows a name that no one wrote down. That's exactly what happened at the Suncrest Motel in Nevada, a half-forgotten pit stop along a highway that swallowed travelers and spat them out exhausted. The night manager, Doug, was the kind of man who had seen everything. Drunks, runaways, hookers, and truckers who swore they saw lights in the desert. But on that September night, he swore he saw the guest book move on its own. It was 1:13 a.m. when the lobby door swung open, though no one entered. The bell above the door jingled, soft but unmistakable. Doug glanced up from his crossword and frowned. "Hello?" he called. Silence. He waited for footsteps. None came. But when he looked back at the ledger, there it was. A new name, freshly written in black ink. Room 9, Nathaniel Grieve. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, the kind you'd see on a tombstone etching. Doug's stomach knotted. Room 9 had been sealed for months, ever since the murder-suicide. A young couple, too much booze, too many secrets. The motel owner had ordered the door padlocked and told Doug never to rent it again. Yet when Doug grabbed the master keys and walked down the hall, the padlock was broken. The door hung slightly open, as though waiting for him. Inside, the room was neat. Too neat. The bed made tight, sheets crisp as if freshly laundered. And there, on the nightstand, was an old leather wallet. He opened it with trembling hands. The ID read, Nathaniel Grieve, born 1902, died 1937. The air went icy, and Doug swore he heard someone breathing, slow and steady, in the corner. He spun, but the room was empty. Back in the lobby, the ledger had turned another page on its own. A new entry appeared in the same ink. Check out, Doug Holloway. Room 9. His blood froze. That was his name. His hands shook, flipping to the last page. Every name scrawled there was a former employee of the Suncrest Motel, each listed with room 9, and next to each name, one word, deceased. Doug tried to leave, but the lobby door wouldn't budge. Behind him, the phone began to ring, shrill and endless. He picked it up, and a voice whispered, Mr. Holloway, your room is ready. That was the last thing anyone ever heard from Doug. When the morning staff arrived, the lobby was empty. Only the ledger remained open, its ink still wet. Room 9 had claimed another guest. Episode 8, The Mirror Above the Bed. If you've ever stayed in a roadside motel, you know the decor is always cheap. Flimsy curtains, scratchy blankets, and that one questionable mirror bolted to the wall. But at the Hollow Pines Motel in Arizona, the mirror wasn't on the wall. It was on the ceiling, hanging right above the bed in room 14. Couples usually found it funny, voyeuristic, a tacky way to spice up a night. But no one ever stayed longer than one night. They all complained about the same thing. The reflection moved when they didn't. Rachel, a traveling nurse, was too tired to care about motel rumors. She checked in late, tossed her bag on the chair, and collapsed on the bed. That's when she noticed it. The mirror, cracked faintly in the corner but still reflecting the dim glow of the bedside lamp. As her eyes grew heavy, she caught something strange. In the glass, her body looked stiff, rigid, like she was lying in a coffin. Her reflection's eyes snapped open, even though hers were shut. She bolted upright, heart racing, but when she looked directly into the mirror, her reflection mimicked perfectly again, calm and sleepy. Maybe it was exhaustion, she thought. Maybe her mind was playing tricks. But then came the sound. A faint scratching from inside the mirror, like fingernails dragging on the other side of the glass. Rachel's breath hitched. She stood on the bed, pressing her palm against the mirror. Cold. Too cold. Her reflection didn't copy her this time. It smiled. Rachel stumbled backward, crashing into the nightstand. The lamp flickered out, plunging the room into shadow. When her eyes adjusted, the reflection was gone. But she wasn't alone. She felt weight sink into the mattress beside her, as though someone had just lain down. Frozen. She turned her head. In the dark, she saw herself, another Rachel, lying on the bed, staring at her with wide, dead eyes. The reflection had climbed out. The next morning, the maid found room 14 spotless, the bed neatly made. Only one thing was out of place: the mirror. It no longer hung from the ceiling. It leaned against the wall, and in its surface was Rachel, pounding silently from the other side of the glass. Room 14 is still available, and if you book it, management will never mention the mirror, because if you look too long, it will stop reflecting you and start choosing instead. Episode 9, the TV that never turned off. Every motel room has that old television, the kind with static fuzz burned into the screen, the remote wrapped in greasy duct tape. But in room 6 of the Silverleaf Motel, the TV never turned off. Not really. Mark, a traveling salesman, checked in one rainy Thursday. The desk clerk warned him almost jokingly, "Don't bother unplugging the TV. It has a mind of its own." Mark laughed it off. He'd heard weirder things on the road. The set was ancient, boxy, dust-caked, with rabbit ear antennas bent at odd angles. When Mark pressed power, the screen went black for a second, then flickered back on, showing a grainy video feed. But it wasn't a channel. It was the room itself. He blinked, confused. On the screen was a live feed of his bed, his suitcase, his jacket tossed on the chair. It was like watching himself from a hidden camera. Creeped out, he searched every corner, checking for lenses. Nothing. He turned back to the TV. His reflection on the screen sat on the bed, but he wasn't moving. His on-screen self just stared straight into the camera, eyes unblinking, lips curled into a slow smile. Mark backed away. "Nope, no way." He yanked the plug from the wall. Sparks flew, the screen died, and then flared back to life, brighter than before. Now the image showed him lying in bed, throat slit open, blood soaking the sheets. Panic clawed through him. He tried leaving, but the door wouldn't budge. Even the window was sealed shut. Behind him, the TV crackled louder, the static rising like voices whispering his name. He couldn't help it. He looked again. This time, the feed showed the motel clerk dragging his body out the door, leaving a dark trail on the carpet. Mark screamed, throwing a chair at the screen. Glass shattered across the floor, but the image didn't break. It spread like liquid, spilling across the room until every wall became a screen. And everywhere he looked, he saw the same thing, his own corpse, filmed from different angles. When housekeeping entered the next morning, the room was empty. No suitcase, no body, only the TV, glowing faintly with static. On the screen, Mark was still there, banging on the glass, begging to be let out. Room 6 is still available, though guests report the television always greets them with the same channel. The last night of the previous tenant. Episode 10, the door that knocked back. Everyone knows the feeling of hearing a knock on your motel door late at night. Most of the time it's nothing. Housekeeping, a drunk guest, or the wrong room. But in room 22 at the Hollow Pines Motel, the knocks always came from the inside. Angela was a long-haul driver, used to sleepless nights and sketchy motels. She checked in after midnight, too exhausted to notice that the clerk hesitated before handing her the key. "Don't answer if anyone knocks," he muttered, almost to himself. The room smelled faintly of mildew. Paint peeled from the doorframe. Still, Angela was too tired to care. She set the deadbolt, crawled under the covers, and let herself drift. That's when the first knock came. 3 sharp raps right by her ear from the inside of the door. She froze. The door didn't rattle. The frame didn't shake. It was like the wood itself was alive, its hollow core echoing with fists that shouldn't exist. "Hello?" she whispered. Her own voice sounded thin in the stale air. Silence. She almost convinced herself she had dreamed it. But then, another knock, slower this time, deliberate, from inside the door. Angela grabbed her flashlight and scanned the room. Nothing. The knocks grew louder, more insistent, until the door seemed to bulge with each hit, the cheap brass knob quivering like teeth chattering. Desperate, she pressed her ear against the wood. From the other side came a sound she will never forget. A whisper, muffled but clear. "Let me out." Her stomach turned ice. Something, or someone, was inside the door itself. The pounding grew frantic now, the door shaking violently. Splinters cracked. Angela backed away, clutching the lamp as a weapon. Then, with one final smash, a hand burst through the wood, pale, rotten, grasping blindly for the lock. Angela screamed and bolted. She didn't stop running until she was back in the lobby, gasping, wild-eyed. The clerk didn't ask questions. He simply slid a different key across the counter and said, "Room 22 has a way of keeping things it shouldn't." The next morning, when staff inspected room 22, the door was intact again. Not a crack, not a splinter. But when they pressed their ear to the wood, they swore they heard knocking, soft, patient, waiting. And if you're unlucky enough to sleep there, don't answer it. Because the door isn't trying to keep anyone out, it's trying to let something in. Episode 11, The Guest Who Wasn't on the Registry. There's a certain kind of silence that only exists in motels at 3 a.m. Too still, too heavy, as if the building itself is holding its breath. At the Willow Crest Motel, that silence was broken one night when a guest appeared who shouldn't have been there. Lena, a college student hitchhiking across state lines, checked into room 4. She was young, cautious, and careful with her money. The clerk gave her the key, and she noticed the registry book. Just 3 guests listed that night. She signed her name, went to her room, and locked the door twice. At 3:17 a.m., she woke to the sound of someone dragging their feet down the hallway. A slow shuffle, like bare skin against carpet. She peered through the peephole. A man stood there, tall, gaunt, with shoulders hunched and head tilted at a strange angle. His eyes were pale, almost glowing in the dark. He didn't knock, didn't move, just stood there. Heart pounding, Lena backed away, telling herself it had to be another guest. But when she checked the registry the next morning, only 3 names were still written. Hers, a trucker in room 8, and a couple in room 12. No one in room 4 saw a man. But the clerk looked pale when she mentioned it. He pulled out an older registry, its pages yellowed and smudged. Near the bottom of a cracked page, there it was. The name of a man who died in that motel 20 years earlier. Strangled in the hallway. His name had been crossed out, but faintly. You could still read it, Thomas Hale. That night, Lena stayed again. She told herself it was fine, just a ghost story. But at 3:17 a.m. sharp, she heard the shuffle again. This time, it didn't stop in the hall. It came right to her door. Through the peephole, the man was closer, his face pressed against the lens, so near she could see the pores of his skin, the bruises around his throat. He whispered, though the glass should have muffled it, "Write my name back in." The next morning, Lena was gone. The clerk swore she checked out, though her signature was still in the book. Right beneath it, in fresh black ink, was another name, one no staff member admitted writing. Thomas Hale, room 4. The motel registry has a rule. Once your name is written, it never truly leaves. Episode 12, The Bed That Remembered. Most motel beds are forgettable. Thin mattresses, questionable stains, pillows that smell faintly of someone else's sweat. But the bed in room 19 at the Crosswind Motel didn't just remember who slept in it. It kept them. Eddie, a traveling guitarist, checked in one Friday night. He tossed his duffel down, tuned his guitar, and collapsed onto the bed with a sigh. The sheets felt strangely warm, almost like someone had been lying there moments before. At first he thought nothing of it, but around midnight, the mattress began to move, just a subtle shift, as though something beneath it was shifting position. He sat up, pulled back the blanket, and froze. The outline of a body was pressed into the sheets, not his own, longer, thinner, perfectly still. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. The impression remained, carved deep into the mattress. Eddie lay back down, telling himself it was fatigue, just a trick of cheap foam. But then he felt it, the sensation of arms wrapping around him. Not gentle, possessive, squeezing tighter with every breath. He bolted upright. The imprint in the bed shifted too, as if the invisible figure had risen with him. The sheets sagged. The pillow dented under a weight he couldn't see. Panicked, Eddie tried to leave. But the moment his feet hit the floor, the mattress exhaled, a long, low sigh that rattled through the springs. He swore he heard words hidden in that breath. "Don't go." The room felt heavier, the air thick with unseen bodies pressing close. He ripped the door open, fled barefoot into the night. When housekeeping entered the next morning, the bed was made. Neat, perfect, except for the impressions, dozens of them carved into the mattress. Outlines of men and women of all shapes and sizes, overlapping, as though every guest who had ever slept there still remained, trapped, waiting, pressed into the fabric. And if you dare lie down in room 19, the bed will welcome you too. It remembers every heartbeat, every breath, and it never lets go. Episode 13, The Corridor That Stretched Too Long. Motel hallways are supposed to be short, just a few doors, a vending machine humming at the end, maybe an ice machine rattling. But the hallway outside room 7 at the Ridgeview Motel never seemed to end. Derek, a traveling photographer, noticed it his first night. He swore the hallway felt longer when he returned from the lobby than when he left. The carpet patterns repeated endlessly. Red diamond, cigarette burn, stain. Then again, red diamond, cigarette burn, stain. He told himself it was exhaustion. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. So at 2 a.m., camera in hand, Derek stepped out of room 7 and started walking. 10 steps, 20, 50. The hallway didn't end. The vending machine he'd seen earlier was gone. The doors he passed all bore the same brass number, 7, room 7, over and over, door after door, stretching into infinity. Derek raised his camera and snapped a photo. The flash lit the hall for a split second, long enough to show shapes in the distance. People, dozens of them, standing still, their faces turned toward him. When the flash died, the hallway was empty again. His pulse spiked. He hurried back the way he came, but every turn led him deeper into the corridor. Panic rose. His shoes scuffed against the carpet as he ran, doors blurring past him, all marked 7. The air thickened, smelled of mold and old cigarettes. Then he saw it. One door slightly open. Finally, a way out. He pushed it wide and stumbled inside. Relief surged, until he realized he had entered his own room. Same bag, same camera case on the bed. Only one thing was different. The camera, sitting on the nightstand, already powered on. The screen showed a photo taken just seconds ago of Derek standing in the hallway, surrounded by those faceless figures, their hands reaching for him. He never checked out. Staff found his belongings the next morning, but Derek himself was gone. The hallway outside room 7 looked perfectly ordinary. Short, familiar. But some nights, guests swear the corridor grows longer than it should. And if you walk too far, you might never find your way back, unless room 7 chooses to let you. Episode 14, The Phone That Dialed Itself. Every motel room has that ugly beige phone bolted to the nightstand. Most people never use it. But in room 11 of the Desert Crest Motel, the phone always called you. Tanya, a traveling nurse, checked in after a grueling double shift. She barely noticed the phone until it rang at 12:01 a.m. A shrill, metallic scream that jolted her awake. Groggy, she answered. Silence. Then came the faintest whisper, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. Check out, before it's too late. Her skin prickled. She slammed the receiver down, convinced it was a prank. But at 12:17 the phone rang again. Same whisper. Only this time it spoke her full name. Tanya Brooks, leave now. She tore the cord from the wall. Dead plastic. No dial tone. Relief washed over her until the phone rang again, cord dangling loose. Heart hammering, Tanya pressed the receiver to her ear. She didn't hear a voice this time. She heard herself, breathing, crying. Then, clear as day, I'm in the bathroom. The receiver slipped from her hands. She turned slowly toward the bathroom door. The light was off, the door half open. But inside, she swore she saw her own silhouette standing there frozen. The bathroom light flickered on by itself. The figure was gone. Tanya didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed until morning, staring at the phone. When she checked out, the clerk gave her a strange look. "Room 11 again?" he muttered. "That phone's been disconnected for years." She laughed nervously until he opened the registry. Her name was already crossed out, ink still wet. Next to it, in shaky handwriting, "Answered." To this day, Room 11's phone keeps ringing at 12:01. And if you're foolish enough to answer, you won't just hear a stranger. You'll hear yourself, begging, pleading, from somewhere inside the room. Episode 15, The Manager Who Never Slept. Every cursed motel has a keeper. Someone who knows too much, who stays long after everyone else has checked out. At the Briarwood Motel, that person was the manager. Guests swore he was always there. Day or night, dawn or midnight, he sat behind the counter in his dusty blue uniform, eyes half closed, like he hadn't blinked in years. Nobody ever saw him eat. Nobody ever saw him leave. When Claire checked in on a stormy night, she noticed it right away. The man's name tag said Walter, but the letters looked faded, as if the plastic itself had been worn down by decades of fingerprints. "Room 9, he muttered, sliding a key across the counter. She frowned. "Isn't that one closed?" Walter's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "The motel decides which rooms are open, not me." The hallway was too dark, the carpet damp beneath her shoes. She found room 9 waiting for her, door ajar. Inside, the air reeked of old smoke and something metallic, like dried blood. The mirror above the bed was cracked, the phone on the nightstand blinking red, though it wasn't plugged in. She almost turned back, but exhaustion pinned her down. She drifted into uneasy sleep. At 3 a.m., she woke to a sound outside her door, shuffling, breathing, then knocking. 3 sharp raps, perfectly even. Her pulse raced. She stared at the phone. It lit up, rang once, and stopped. She picked up the receiver with trembling hands. A voice whispered, "Don't open the door. Don't leave. Walter is watching." She dropped the phone and ran. The lobby lights flickered as she burst inside. Walter was waiting, motionless, eyes glowing faintly in the fluorescent hum. "You can't leave," he said softly, voice cracking like static. "The motel keeps who it needs." Behind him, the registry book flipped its pages on its own, ink bleeding across the paper. Her name appeared there, written in a hand that wasn't hers, and beside it, one word, permanent. Claire was never seen again. But travelers still whisper about Briarwood's manager, how he never sleeps, how he never leaves, and how sometimes, when you pass the lobby, you'll catch him staring at the registry, waiting for the next name to appear. Because the rooms don't keep themselves, someone has to hold the keys. Capítulo 16, The Sermon of Blood. The church was silent that morning, suffocated in a darkness that refused to leave, even as sunlight tried to pierce through the stained glass. But the light was no longer pure. It bent, twisted, and bled red against the stone walls, as if every ray carried the memory of sin. Father Aurelio stepped into the pulpit, his trembling hands clutching a Bible swollen with moisture, though no rain had touched it. The pages dripped as if the very word of God had begun to bleed. Parishioners filled the pews, their faces pale, their lips pressed tightly as though afraid that any whisper might invite damnation. "My flock," Aurelio began, his voice cracked, a thread about to snap. "The time of judgment is not coming. It is here." From the crucifix above, a single drop of thick, blackened blood slid down Christ's thorn-crowned face, striking the altar with a sound that echoed louder than a bell. Gasps broke through the congregation. Some crossed themselves, others wept. Then the miracle or the curse began. The walls of the church pulsed, breathing like a lung. From between the cracks in the stones seeped thin streams of crimson, tracing symbols across the marble floor. Words no one dared read aloud, words that burned the eyes. Aurelio raised the Bible higher, but the ink within had already transformed. The passages now snarled at him in a language not of heaven, not of earth. His throat constricted. He wanted to speak the truth, but the words that came out were not his own. "They will drink his blood," he intoned, his voice deepening unnaturally. Not in remembrance, not in faith, but in hunger. The congregation erupted in screams as veins opened on their wrists without a blade, blood flowing into the chalice set upon the altar. The chalice filled itself, overflowing, staining the linen with a sacrament no priest would dare consecrate. And yet one by one they rose, drawn by an unseen hand, their eyes glazed, their mouths open as if possessed by thirst. Aurelio dropped the Bible. His knees buckled. He wanted to run, to break the spell, but the crucifix held him in place. Christ's stone eyes, once lifeless, now glared down with judgment and hunger. When the first parishioner drank, a silence heavier than death fell upon the room. And then the church doors slammed shut, locking from the inside. The true sermon had begun. Capítulo 17. The silence that answered prayers. The church smelled of iron and incense, a mingling of holiness and rot. Every pew was slick with blood where the faithful had collapsed. Their mouths still crimson, their eyes rolled back as if staring into a heaven that had abandoned them. The chalice, once a vessel of grace, now boiled with a living, restless liquid that pulsed as though it had veins of its own. Father Aurelio stood frozen at the altar, unable to breathe, unable to blink. The crucifix above him had changed. The Christ that hung nailed to the wood no longer bore an expression of suffering, but of a grotesque smile, an upward curl of stone lips that had never been carved there before. Then it began, a whisper. It did not come from a single throat, but from all of them. The unconscious parishioners, the statues of saints, the shadows in the corners. They spoke in unison, their voices layering into a low, thunderous murmur. Pray to him. Aurelio fell to his knees, clutching his ears, but the whisper only grew louder. His own lips moved against his will, shaping prayers he had recited since childhood. Our Father, who art in heaven. But the words twisted midway, each phrase reshaped until they became curses. Our Father, who dwells in hunger, thy kingdom bleed, thy will devour. The ground beneath the altar split with a sudden crack. From the fissure rose not fire, but silence, an unnatural, suffocating absence that swallowed every word, every sound. Even the desperate sobs of the priest vanished as though stolen. In that silence, something answered. From the chalice, a figure began to form. Not a man, not an angel, but a shape of flesh and shadow, its body rippling as though made of unconfessed sins. Its face was a mask of shifting features, sometimes Aurelio's own, sometimes the faces of the dead, sometimes no face at all. The silence broke with a single sound, the groan of the church bells, though no hand had touched the ropes. The figure stepped onto the altar, dripping black liquid onto the sacred cloth. It leaned toward Aurelio and pressed a finger to his trembling lips. No more prayers, priest, it whispered, though its voice was not sound but a vibration that shook his bones. Only silence. And in that moment, Aurelio realized the truth. Every prayer uttered in this church had not ascended to God. They had descended into something else, something that had finally decided to answer. Capítulo 18. The bells that rang without hands. The bells tolled again, deeper this time, vibrating through the marrow of Father Aurelio's bones. Yet no rope swayed, no sacristan pulled at their cords. The sound came from somewhere older, deeper, like the ringing of iron buried beneath the earth. Every window in the church rattled, stained glass cracked in spider webs, bleeding shards of colored light across the floor. The parishioners, still collapsed in their pews, twitched in unison as though the sound was crawling inside their skulls. Aurelio staggered backward, eyes locked on the figure that had risen from the chalice. Its body was no longer shifting. No, it had chosen a shape now. It wore a parody of priestly vestments, but woven from living shadows that dripped like tar. Its face was blank, featureless, except for a mouth that opened wide enough to split its skull in half. From that mouth came the bells. Each toll echoed inside Aurelio's head until his thoughts weren't his own anymore. His childhood prayers, his sermons, his confessions, all hollowed out and replaced with a single command: kneel. He dropped instantly, not by choice but by force. His knees slammed the stone floor so hard he tasted blood. Around him, the congregation rose as one. The dead-eyed faithful shuffled to their feet, moving not like individuals, but like a single organism, controlled by the rhythm of the bells. Their mouths opened in sync, releasing a sound that wasn't human speech but a metallic drone, as if their throats had turned into cathedral pipes. The entity extended its hand. In its palm, Aurelio saw something small and gleaming, a fragment of the chalice, warped and sharp like a fang. It pressed the shard into Aurelio's hand and closed his fingers around it, forcing the cut, forcing the blood. Then it leaned close, its voice inside him rather than around him. Every prayer you ever spoke was mine. Every sin you thought absolved was mine. Every soul in this house belongs to me. Ring the bell, priest. Ring it with your blood. Aurelio's ears bled as the bells roared louder, shaking dust from the rafters, shaking the crucifix loose until it crashed to the floor with a thunder that made the ground quake. The smiling Christ face cracked, splitting apart until behind it there was nothing but a void. The entity gestured to the fallen crucifix. Strike it? Aurelio, strike the hollow wood. Let the true sound of your church be heard. And as his trembling hand lifted the shard, Aurelio realized he was no longer holding glass, but a blackened clapper, heavy as sin itself. The bells were waiting. Capitolo 19. The crucifix that shattered like bone. The clapper in Aurelio's hand pulsed with warmth, though it was forged from nothing but shadow and iron. His knuckles turned white as he gripped it tighter, the wound in his palm dripping a steady trail of blood that stained the altar cloth. The bells above thundered, louder, closer. Though he could see with his own eyes, they hung motionless in the tower. The congregation stood in perfect silence now, their mouths open in eternal screams that made no sound. Their eyes glowed faintly, as if each iris reflected the flames of an unseen fire. The entity waited. Its blank face leaned close to Aurelio's, and though it had no eyes, he felt its gaze sink inside him, peeling him open thought by thought, memory by memory. Strike the hollow wood, it said, its voice vibrating in his bones. Break the silence. End the masquerade. Aurelio's arm rose against his will. The clapper was heavy now, so heavy it bent his shoulder downward, but still he lifted it higher, trembling, until it hovered above the fallen crucifix. The stone Christ lay smiling, cracked lips frozen in mockery. The wood beneath it seemed to breathe, hollow yet alive, as if waiting. When Aurelio struck, the sound was not the ringing of a bell, it was the shattering of bone. The crucifix split down the middle, splinters flying like shrapnel. A soundless scream filled the church, so piercing that Aurelio felt his teeth crack. The parishioners fell to their knees all at once, not in worship but in seizure, bodies writhing as if strings pulled from beneath the floor. The altar burst open. From beneath the cracked marble, hands emerged, hundreds of them, blackened and skeletal, clawing at the air. They tore their way up from the ground. Not flesh, not spirit, but something caught between. Their mouths opened, yet no words came, only the echo of every prayer Aurelio had ever heard in this church. Thousands of voices, colliding, distorted, until the prayers became screams. The entity stepped back as though unveiling its masterpiece. This is your flock, priest, it murmured. Saved by silence, baptized in hunger. Every amen was a nail, every hallelujah a chain. Aurelio clutched his ears, blood streaming from his nose, but the prayers filled him anyway, worming into his skull until he could not tell where they ended, and he began. Then the bells rang once more. This time Aurelio understood. They were not calling the faithful, they were sealing the door. Behind the shattered crucifix, the void gaped wider, a wound in reality itself. From it poured a darkness alive with movement, 1,000 shapes writhing, straining, waiting to cross, and the clapper in Aurelio's hand grew heavier still, pulling him toward the abyss. The bells were not finished. They were only beginning. Capitolo 20, the motel behind the church. The bells reached a pitch that was no longer sound but force, shoving the walls outward, bending the air into vibrating waves. Father Aurelio collapsed, clapper still in his blood-soaked hand, his body convulsing as the prayers of centuries filled his lungs like drowning water. The congregation was gone. In their place remained only husks, shells of flesh that stood upright without life, their skin flaking away in ash that drifted toward the void. The crucifix split apart entirely, and the void yawned wide. Aurelio expected fire, demons, gnashing teeth of hell. Instead, he saw fluorescent lights. Rows of doors, rusted ice machines, a neon vacancy sign buzzing faintly against the dark. It was a motel. The church was never a church. It had always been this place, hidden beneath a mask of stone and stained glass. Every prayer had been spoken inside its rooms, every confession whispered into its walls, the beds, the carpets, the peeling wallpaper. Each had drunk in the sins of travelers, storing them like fuel. The entity stepped forward, no longer cloaked in shadows. It wore a bellhop's uniform, the red jacket stiff with dried blood, the cap tilted politely on its faceless head. In its voice was mockery and triumph. "You see now, priest, the house of God was never his. It was ours. Every motel, every roadside inn where the desperate sleep, where secrets rot into the wallpaper, that is our cathedral. And you were our preacher all along." Aurelio clawed at the ground, desperate to resist the pull of the void. But the clapper dragged him forward, metal fusing to his hand, searing into his flesh. His screams echoed across the rows of motel doors, and from behind each one, something stirred. Doorknobs rattled, locks snapped, and then they opened. From every room poured shapes, some human, some not. The guests who had died in their beds, who had been strangled in their showers, who had whispered their last prayers to peeling ceilings. They stepped out, their faces frozen in the moments of their deaths. They shuffled into the parking lot like a congregation assembling for mass. The bells roared one last time, collapsing the ceiling of the church, tearing away its facade completely. Aurelio lay on the cracked asphalt, staring up at a starless sky, the neon vacancy sign burning above him like a new moon. The entity extended its hand, not in violence but in welcome. "It is finished. You are the bell now, and you will ring forever." The clapper in Aurelio's palm struck his chest, and his scream became the tolling of a bell that shook the motel down to its foundations. Every door opened, every soul answered, and the motel, no longer a place but a mouth, devoured the night.
Capítulo 21, Vacancy Eternal. The motel stands on an endless road now. No map marks it. No GPS will guide you there. Yet drivers find themselves pulling into its cracked lot when midnight grows too heavy and sleep claws at their eyes. The neon vacancy sign still flickers. Its hum louder than the crickets, louder than the tires on asphalt. To some, it feels like a beacon. To others, a trap. Inside, the rooms are always ready. Beds made with stiff sheets. Televisions buzzing with static. Showers dripping rust. Yet each room breathes. The wallpaper pulses faintly. The carpet exhales dust. And if you listen closely enough, you hear whispers beneath the hum of the AC unit. Guests check in. They always do. A salesman who lied one too many times. A couple whose love soured into violence. A traveler running from guilt heavier than his suitcase. They come for rest. But the motel does not offer rest. It offers confession, not to God, but to the walls themselves. And the walls remember. In the office sits a man in a bellhop's uniform, faceless beneath his tilted cap. He hands over keys without words, his gloved fingers brushing yours long enough to leave a chill. Behind him, on the counter, rests a single brass clapper, blackened with use. Sometimes it vibrates faintly, as though eager to ring again. If you ask about the priest, if you notice the framed photograph on the office wall of a weary man in tattered robes, no one answers. But at night, when the bells toll without hands, you might hear his voice woven in, screaming prayers that twist into curses. The road always leads away in the morning, as though nothing strange happened at all. Guests depart pale and hollow-eyed, their luggage heavier though nothing new has been packed. Some never make it home. Some return again and again, drawn without reason, as if something unfinished calls them back. The motel waits. It does not need advertising. It does not need a sign. Because one truth echoes in every toll of its unseen bells. There will always be sin. There will always be weary travelers. And there will always be vacancy.